live.
Hey, Jonathan.
Where is he?
Oh, you're muted.
Hey, Jonathan.
Still muted.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
There we go. Hey.
Hey, you should have a
Still muted
backdrop with all the Chicago.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Got the only backdrop I need.
That's right. You got the important one. Excellent. All right, here we go. Hey, you should have a backdrop
Still muted
with all the Chicago.
Hey.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody to the Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday night. I put a little digital background behind me. I figured, yeah, everybody's getting into the mode. Emmett has got a Bierstadt, I believe. Is that a Bierstadt painting behind him?
It is.
And Jim has got just a nice picture of a courtyard in the background, and I have my regular view from my condo living room, not in this room. This room has the view of the backside of just the lagoon and the ports and the cruise ships. They're not there. There are no cruise ships there. All right. Today is we do this once a month. This is the Hangout with ships. They're not there. With my supporters, and we have a good group assembled today. Some first timers, and this will be fun. And we also have some people joining us by phone. So we'll thank you guys for joining. I don't have your name, so I'm going to identify you by your phone number, and not your entire phone number is not showing. Zoom used to show the entire phone number, and I'd have privacy issues. But now they're only showing up as partial numbers. I did go to the beach today. I was telling the guys I did go to the beach today. I went to the beach yesterday. But, it's a little like when you're a teenager and doing something you're not supposed to because the cops all around and sneaking onto the beach because it's illegal to go to the beach here. But we pulled it off. It was great. Okay, so the way the format is, I go around the group. They ask questions. We do a Q&A. We'll take some questions from the phone guys as well. We'll do that for a few rounds. We'll see if we do any super chat. I also have like a list of topics and questions that I got from some of my supporters. I'll have to do that a separate show because we've got so many people online today that we're not going to get a lot of questions through unless we go for the 3-hour Jonathan Honing wish for a show, 3 hours. Although he left last time. He said, I want 3 hours and an hour and a half, and he disappeared. So so I don't know. So I'm not doing 3 hours. It's too late. I'm too tired. The beach will take it out of you. It'll make you tired. All right. So let's start with Jim. Question of the month. Jim, go ahead.
Oh, you're on. And this time I'm prepared with a whole bunch of questions. First thing, I know a lot of people who watch this are in finance and such. So I thought I'd throw this one out. I was really intrigued to find out that India's their central bank has released so-called sovereign gold bonds. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
You care to summarize and comment on it? Because I find it really intriguing, but it's limited.
Yeah, I mean it's a bond that the principal is basically linked to the value of gold. I don't know if it pays an interest. I don't know if there's a coupon on the bond.
2%.
2%. So you get 2% plus whatever happens to gold. So if gold goes, you get your equivalent of the gold value. I don't know if it's
at maturity.
Or at maturity. So however long the bond is.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it's something like 12 years. I could be off on that, but they also have an allowance for you to sell it early at a lower
My
Case
guess
one-
is it's tradable. There's probably a market for it. They'll develop a market for it, and you'll be able to trade it. I mean, my view of it is long-term gold seems to preserve its value, its purchasing power. So it's in a sense an inflation hedge. So if you believe inflation is coming, which it might be, this is, we're in uncharted water in terms of what the Fed is doing and what the Fed, what the Federal Reserve basically is doing in a sense of the quantity of money it's spending. Then it's not a bad way to hedge against inflation and preserve the value of what you buy. You can also, in the United States, you can also buy inflation protected bonds, which actually link to the CPI. So you'd have to decide what you think is more representative of your specific purchasing power, of what your basket of goods. Is it the CPI in the United States, or is it gold? But it's just one way to buy gold and get a little bit of interest on it. A lot of people buy gold and don't get any interest. It just sits there. So this is a way to get some interest, which I guess is a positive. I don't think it's revolutionary in any sense. I don't think it's going to change much, unfortunately. I'd love for a major country out there to go on a gold standard and kind of force the world. I think a lot of people would start using that currency and they'd gravitate towards it. I just don't see any government willing to give up the power that fiat money gives them. And gold, of course, restricts the power of the government. It takes away the ability to print money on demand. And I don't think any government out there is interested or willing to do that. But it is interesting that India would do that. I haven't read enough about it to know if it represents any kind of shift in thinking in India. All right, John.
So Yaron, what business leaders do you most respect and why?
You're going to get me in trouble. I mean, I respect business leaders that are incredibly productive and innovative and generate enormous results. And, in the past, I've talked about the fact that I really admire Jack Welch, although I got at least one email saying that I completely misunderstood Jack Welch. And, I was completely wrong about him, but I thought he was the former CEO of GE. I mean, former, a long time ago, CEO of GE. So I really had a lot of respect for him. I saw him speak a few times. On video, and I've seen some of his books that are good. I think his leadership principles are good principles. So I'm a fan of his. But I'd say over the last 15 years, I'm mainly a fan of the tech guys, right? So I think I'm a huge fan of Bill Gates. I think he's super smart. I think all these conspiracy theories right now going around, I don't know if you guys have seen them, about him wanting to take over the world, about him wanting to poison us all with his new vaccine, about him wanting, he wants to shrink the population of the world, so the vaccine's going to kill a certain percentage of people. All this garbage. It's just horrific, because I think while he's wrong philosophically and politically, while all these CEOs, most of these CEOs are wrong philosophically and politically, they are brilliant producers. They are brilliant managers. They have extraordinary minds. When Bill Gates approaches a problem, he approaches it in a first-handed way, like a business problem or even a philanthropy problem. If you follow his philanthropy, it's first-handed, it's original. He tries to solve problems. He's not looking for government for solutions. He's trying to solve problems. So I think I'm a huge fan, have been for a long time, of Steve Jobs. I mean, until he died, I'm a long time Apple user and really dedicated. And Steve Jobs, I just think his arc through the industry has been fascinating. And I put up a debate today, so a few hours ago, between me and a socialist, and it's a socialist who's written a lot about tech. And he despised Steve Jobs. I mean, if you watch the debate, he's like, "Oh, Steve Jobs yelled at his employees." I said, "I wish I could be an employee of Apple just so Steve Jobs could yell at me." I mean, how cool would that be? I mean, he was a true genius and a perfectionist and a valuer, a real valuer. I haven't really followed the path, kind of the trajectory of the initial Google guys, but they obviously did spectacularly well. I admire a lot of the venture capitalists. I have a huge respect for, the old line, Sequoia Capital and people who work there and them in business. I'm sure I'm missing people.
What about Ken Moelis?
Yeah, I mean, Ken Moelis is both, an acquaintance. I know him quite well and has done a phenomenal job. Is John Allison, of course, who I missed. How could I miss John? I mean, John Allison was the CEO of BB&T and took it from a little farm bank in Wilson, North Carolina, to the 10th, now I think the 6th largest bank in the United States, largest financial institution in the United States, out of Winston-Salem. So Ken Moelis, who built his own investment bank, he started it in the midst of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and has built it into this independent, fantastic. And Ken and John, examples of two CEOs who have the right philosophy, who are, I don't know if Ken wants to be known as an objectivist, but it's about as true as it goes, right? About as close as it gets. He's spoken at our events. He's spoken about the influence Atlas Shrugged has had on it. I'm an admirer of people like Lars Christiansen in Denmark, who started Saxo Bank and built that up again. Somebody who was heavily influenced by Ayn Rand. And then I've met a ton of hedge fund guys who are brilliant, who are spectacular. I've met a lot of just, old line businessmen who just started with nothing and built a business. And it might not be splashy like Apple or Microsoft or Google or something, but they've done all the hard work, they've created value, and they care about every little element within their work. So there's a lot of those. America's filled with medium-sized businessmen who have really succeeded, who've become millionaires and more, who have built up. And I've met a lot of people like that. That's the one upside of fundraising. Generally, I hate fundraising, but the one upside of fundraising for the Institute was you get to meet a lot of business people. And it's always a pleasure, whatever field they are. But the giants are historically a huge fan of Rockefeller, of Carnegie, and of JP Morgan, the banker. And of course, how could I forget Michael Milken, who was one of the great financiers, and not just a genius financier, but somebody who inspired his employees. Ken Moelis was an employee of Michael Milken, as was Leon Black, who today is a gazillionaire private equity guy, as was so many successful people today were employees of Michael Milken, and he inspired them. And he worked unbelievable hours, and he had a team, and they really functioned as a team. And it's you read about it, it's truly inspiring. And all of them, all the people around him went on to have phenomenal careers. So it's amazing how many great businessmen there are. And one of the tragedies, I think, in objectivism and among objectivists is there's a Marxist tendency among objectivists. Marxists and leftists think that everything is politics. Everything is politics. So if you talk to Marxists, art is about politics. There's no metaphysical epistemology. There's no moral message in art. It's all political. Everything is pure political art. Relationships, every aspect of life is through a political eye. So they can't judge a human being separate from his politics. And there's too much of this in the objectivist movement. We can't look at somebody like even what's his Zuckerberg at Facebook, and what a phenomenal job he's done creating a platform that half the population of the earth enjoys. And they can't separate that. He's genius as a productive person from, oh my God, he's a lefty. It's not, I don't judge people by their politics. I judge people by their character. And one of the most important aspects of character is productiveness. Right. Yeah, Jonathan wanted to say something.
I'll just quickly throw in, Ron, I talked to a prospective investor the other day. You were saying not a flashy person, but a woman now in her late 50s. Quick story. She came to the country in her 20s, didn't even speak English. She became a doctor. The long story is she's a property portfolio now worth $10 million. And wow. She's a successful doctor. So she's this, again, not a flashy thing, but truly an American success story, the American dream over and over and over again. It really gives me hope for the future.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you remind me of a businesswoman. I don't think I ever met her in person, but I spoke to her a couple of times on the phone. Darla Moore. I don't know if you've ever heard of Darla Moore. Darla Moore was the first woman to have a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. I think that's true. And she came from nothing. She was.
Wait, you thinking Muriel Siebert?
No, so maybe I'm. So it's still Dollar but maybe she's not the first woman to have.
All right, sure.
She was. She came from nothing, South Carolina, what you would call white trash, right? And she became very senior in Wall Street. She became and she married the billionaire with kind of a American Indian name, Lightfoot or something. I can't remember. Anyway, she has had this phenomenal success. I mean, the business school at the University of South Carolina is named after just an amazing woman, and went back to South Carolina, has invested a lot in South Carolina, particularly in trying to invest in trying to get other, kids from poor families who have talent to get them, to help them, to increase their opportunities. So there's so many good stories about amazing American entrepreneurs and American business people. And yeah, I mean, Jonathan's right. You meet them, and many of them are immigrants. Many of them were poor when they grew up. I mean, the 19th century style, bootstrapping yourself, succeeding, still exists. It still happens in this country, and it's tragic that we kind of demean that, and particularly the way we think about immigrants. Emmett.
Yes, going back to you mentioned the debate that you had with a socialist that you posted today. I watched that, and it seemed like there was a lot of equivocation going on during that debate, where he would equivocate between, physical force and economic power.
Yeah.
And that, how do you put up with that? It's so frustrating. I was yelling at the screen a lot.
I can imagine if I were not in the debate, I'd be yelling at the screen. I mean, you have a completely different personality when you're there. But look, this is what they've been doing forever, right? I mean, Ayn Rand talked about this, and of course, Harry Binswanger has one of his best essays is this essay on economic power versus political power. And I actually was happy that he did it, because it gave me an opportunity to talk about, hey, there's this thing called economic power, and there's this thing called political power, and they're very different, and they're not the same, and you have to separate the voluntary from the forced, from the coerced, from a gun, from what's really. But if you watched my debates with David Pacman originally, he did the same thing, exactly the same thing. This is what the left relies on, because they can't get away in their own minds. They can't get away because they believe that they're for freedom. And this is how they justify they're for free speech. The better left, right? Not the completely wacky. They're for free speech. They're for abortion rights. They're for, a bunch of social rights, right? But then what happens to economic rights? We say, well, economic rights are different because economic rights involve power. They involve, in a sense, force. And force, therefore, the government has to intervene. And it's only in the economy do we see these force kind of relationship. Now, what's interesting is the new left doesn't accept that. This is the big difference between the old left and the new left. The new left says, no, these power relationships exist in all human interaction, not just economic. This is why we have to regulate you because you're white. This is why we have to regulate you because you're male. Because you're white or male or whatever, you now have a power relationship vis-a-vis a woman or vis-a-vis a minority. So they have taken this Marxist concept of economic power being the equivalence of coercion, the equivalence of force, and they've expanded that concept to every human interaction. You're tall, I'm short, so you have power over me. And this is the whole intersectionality. We create now whole sciences of who has power over whom, under what context is, in which situations. And we need to then restrict the people with power. We need to regulate them in a sense. We need to constrain them so that they don't exert that power over others. And it's not it's not coercion. It's self-defense. Because you're tall and I'm short. And I can't help being short and you can't help being tall. So we have to chop your legs down or do something to prevent you from exerting this power over me that you can't even help yourself but do because you're white. They recognize you can't help yourself but being white. Now you have to atone, you have to feel privileged, so this is a really, really, really important concept where they have equivocated, or they have stolen the concept. I'm going to call this, they've stolen the concept of coercion, of power, of force, and they've applied it where it doesn't belong. And by doing that, they now have expanded government power, and they've expanded their power over everybody's life. And they've expanded the realm of guilt. That's the other thing that works, which is a moral, which is a way to control people, by making them feel guilty for being, white, male, tall, whatever.
Well, at least they're predictable in a debate.
Yes, I mean, the socialists, I've debated enough of them that now there's not much new. This one was a little different because he had such a technology focused, and I thought he dug himself. He kept saying how wonderful these technology were, and he talked about this network effect, and I'm going, yeah, network effects are great. This is why, who cares how much market power they have? They're taking advantage of the network effect, which means we benefit, because every time somebody joins the network, we get a disproportionate benefit from them joining the network that Facebook or Microsoft has created. So network effects are fantastic. And he went on and on and on about the wonders of network effects. I thought that was very convenient for me. But yes, it's maddening because the left, and not just the left, the right as well, he started, I'm going to define freedom, and then he doesn't. He just describes two different approaches to freedom with no definition, no idea of definition, and nobody defines anything anymore. And you notice in their minds, all these concepts are floating. They mean nothing. And the left, this equivocation on the issue of force is the key to understanding the left attitude towards all these issues.
I did seem to notice a difference between your conversation or David Pakman's moderation, in that he seemed to have a really good grasp from his previous conversation with you of your position. So he was able to kind of lead you and articulate it. So that's.
I thought David did a really good job moderating. So I thought he was very good. I was a little worried. He skewed it a little bit in the other guy's favor, but not in any significant way. So I thought he did a very good job, and I would do it again with David moderating, because I do think it was good. It was good. So hopefully we'll do more of these. I thought that one went well. I think even the leftists who watch it'll at least cause them to think. Some of these ideas challenge them. All right, hey Jennifer.
Hi. What do you say to the socialist argument that it works in a small, homogeneous society?
Socialism does.
Yeah.
I say they don't know what they're talking about. All their communes.
Send them to the kibbutz.
Yes, I was just going to get to the kibbutz, exactly. All their communes, whether it's the Paris commune, all the 19th century communes, were homogeneous groups. And they started out lovely, with love, and everybody loved each other, and it was great. And for the first few months, they flourished, and they had a great time, and they were partying and everything. And within a year, they were stabbing each other in the back and having secret trials and excommunicating people, or literally killing people, all kinds of stuff. So these things fall apart. And then the kibbutz, which lasted longer than most and was successful for longer than most, also fell apart. And could have never been successful economically if not for subsidies, originally from rich Jews overseas. And then once the state of Israel came about, from the state itself. But the kibbutz was about as close to a communist environment where everybody believed in it, and it was homogeneous. They were Eastern European. They were all, they were all committed communists. And they all came from about the same place. They were all Jews.
You have to put works in quotes, because it's like, works in the sense that they didn't starve for a couple of years, but like, what kind of a life is that to live in that?
And if you've ever, I don't know if Ron ever spent time on a kibbutz, but I spent a little time in kibbutz Yagul, and it
sounds terrible.
Hated each other. They hated each other. They would come, we would be outsiders. So we came in, and this faction would come to us complaining about that faction, and the next faction would come complaining about the other two factions. Somebody else would come complain, and it constantly, and it makes complete sense when you think about it. Everybody gets exactly the same outcome, exactly the same. Everybody has the same size TV. If anybody has a TV, everybody has to have a TV. Nobody spends more time with their kids than anybody else spends time with their kids. Everybody eats the same food in the communal. What's that?
No, we're just talking about recommending John's book as an example of a business person.
Yes.
Gentleman said, how can I learn about John Allison? Get his book. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely. No, Jonathan's always got his marketing hat on, which is fantastic.
Get his book.
I do have to say, on defense of the kibbutz,
Yeah.
it's great for the 70% that don't like to work hard because they have great, easy life. And then the other 30% will do all the work.
But it's not great for them either, because psychologically they
I'm being
resent the fact,
sarcastic.
yeah, I know. They resent the fact that they're parasites. And so even they're miserable. So it's even the people you think, oh, they get it easy in life. They're miserable because they get it easy in life and they're living off of other people. The amount of happiness I saw in kibbutz was astounding. The only people who like the kibbutz, and I have to say, the only people who like the kibbutz were the kids, because no adult supervision or very little adult supervision. They gotta really hang out. They gotta hang out together. They gotta do fun stuff. It was and the kids were really having fun, but and a little bit too much fun often. So the first entry for drugs into Israel was through the kibbutz, the European and the American volunteers who came in the late 60s and in the 70s to work in kibbutzim would bring the drugs, and the kids start. But it was, the kibbutz is a great example, and all the communes a great example. It never, ever, ever works.
Does it make sense too that the reason they're going at each other and talking about each other is because their focus is not, they're not being egoists. So their focus is not on their own life, but on what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's right. They're second-handed completely. And that causes envy and jealousy and guilt. And, they covet each other's wives because, hey, we're sharing. Why is the stop there? And more affairs and more heartbreak and just a horrible life. And in recent years, there have been some books in Israel that have kind of brought a lot of this out, because for a long time, because Israel was so socialist in its founding, the kibbutz was romanticized. It was the ideal. It was Israeli to the core. And that has really changed, I'd say, in the last, 10, 20 years, really changed. Plus, there are no kibbutzim anymore. They've all been privatized, basically.
Well, they are, but they don't have the concept of communism anymore.
Yeah.
Now you get as much as you want and for what you work.
All right, Ron.
So I have a question on something that, if I understood you right, in terms of the current status. So if I understood correctly, you stated that since we are not in a truly free society and therefore forced to pay for others for the medical expenses, then you accept that we should be able to enforce elderly or high-risk persons being quarantined, etc., on the ground that the rest of us might have to pay for them. And I just wonder, isn't that a slippery slope? Because using similar logic, next thing we'll ban the large soda drinks because we have to pay for the medical bill for those people who drink large soda drinks.
Absolutely. It's a very slippery slope. And I hate to be on it, and I hate to advocate for that. But given an emergency, I think I always say this, rather than locking us all down, I could understand an argument that said, okay, we're going to lock down elderly. Now, I prefer it all be voluntary, and I think it's easy to do it voluntary, right? Because old age homes, or I don't know what the politically correct name for old age home is. There must be some better name for that. But, we'll do it voluntarily because they don't want the people there dying. And we're seeing in New Jersey and other places, and in Washington, in Seattle, we saw the kind of horrific consequences when coronavirus gets in there. So my preference is it's all voluntary. But if you're going to use restrictions use emergency powers because there's a pandemic, and you could imagine that the government does have some emergency powers. Again, I think they've blown it completely in this case. Then I think if you're going to isolate anybody, it should be the vulnerable, right? The people who are going to, the argument for all the arguments for the lockdown. What are the arguments for the lockdown? They're not, we're going to reduce the number of dead people. That's not the argument. It was not the argument at the beginning. It's never been the argument. The argument for the lockdown is we want to flatten the curve so that we don't burden the hospitals. Because if you burden the hospitals, the death will go through the roof. So if you're going to flatten the curve, if you're going to lock anybody down to flatten the curve, I'm saying it should be the people who are most likely to land up in hospital, which are old people. So I agree with you. It's a slippery slope. And I wouldn't go out there and be a big advocate for that as a coercive measure. But I'd rather they do that than put us all under lock and key. And I think if you're going to flatten the curve, that's the best way to flatten the curve while minimizing the violation of rights. But I don't like anything about anything that anybody's done in this crisis. It's so pathetic that it's just so upsetting to see how our politicians have behaved on every level, and how the bureaucrats have behaved, and how bad this is, and how many rights are being violated. It's hard in this context to give advice. And then, of course, because I've also said there's an emergency, the government should invest in hospitals, which is also a slippery slope and very dangerous, right? But what choice do you have when the only source of capital is government, because they've squeezed the capital out of hospitals from any other source? They've regulated them so badly. So in an emergency, sometimes you have to do these quick things, for a short period of time. Jonathan.
The issue of unintended consequences. How do you make the case of why unintended consequences are a danger? Something, for example, like, and you've pointed out how the tariffs, one of the unintended consequences of tariffs is that the PPE is now more difficult to get, and some of the steel that American manufacturers has been more expensive. I look back at the whole cash for clunkers thing and saw some of the unintended consequences of that, and it pushed up the prices of used cars, etc. How do you
think of the new unemployment benefits that people are getting, which make it the significant number of people are getting more unemployment benefits than wages. So
how do you make the case against unintended consequences, knowing that, as you always say, you have to make it from a moral argument? But how can you make the case against unintended consequences when you don't really know what the unintended consequences are going to be?
Well, this is why going down that rabbit hole is so difficult, right? Because you don't always know. And Ayn Rand, by the way, hated the term unintended consequences. And she said, no. Most of these consequences are absolutely intended. I mean, they know, it's not like these guys are idiots. They know that that unemployment insurance is going to be more expensive. They want it to be more expensive to try to force people to put together a $15 minimum wage. They know steel is going to be more expensive, but they want to bring it all home. So they're willing for all the costs to go up because it's more important for them to bring everything home, because make America great again, or whatever. So mostly these, or if they don't know, they're evading because they're not that hard to see, at least not the second level, maybe the third level consequences are harder. So the intellectuals pushing this are not innocent. Unintended consequences assumes they're innocent. And she makes the case they're not innocent. They know what they're doing, or they are evading, and they're morally culpable for everything that they're doing.
A concrete example of that right now, this $600 a week that many people are getting who are out of work. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Matt Christensen calculated this himself or if he's quoting someone else, but somebody figured out that equates to $15 an hour, which is the minimum wage that a lot on the left are trying to push for.
Yeah, it's $600 on top of the unemployment insurance, which gives you 15. Is exactly what the left is doing. And of course the Republicans are so pathetic that they can't negotiate that away. They crumble in front of that. The only way to do it is you have to say something like, and I know you have to say it all in sound bites, and you're really, really good at it, but it's hard to make a moral argument in sound bites on television, right? So I think the argument has to be, look, program X is immoral because it's intervening in productive decisions of individuals who have their own capital at stake. It's immoral because it's taking money from some and giving it to others. And we all know there are consequences to this thing. I don't know exactly what they are in this particular case, but here's some examples where we did things and we thought were good, but we really know, like minimum wage, unemployment, minimum wage causes unemployment, or steel tariffs, all of this stuff. We know here are the things that happen. And yet we never learn from them. But I mean,
what about bringing back the old "there is no such thing as a free lunch" ideal from economics to make the point that there is a cost, but then the altruism, people say, I don't care if there's a cost. The cost.
But I want my free lunch.
That is what they're saying too.
But it's, I mean, AOC says, I don't care about the cost, right? But that's because when she's attacked, they've divorced the cost from morality and they're letting her take the moral high ground. But if the cost is a moral cost, by giving people welfare, you're enslaving them into poverty. You're literally making them poor for the rest of their lives because you're crushing their ambition. That's a moral argument.
Well, can we quickly role play? Here is Yaron Brook from the chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, host of the Yaron Brook Show. Yaron, you're against the Paycheck Protection Program. This is helping people keep their jobs at the most. How can you say that you should be against this $500 billion in stimulus? Dr. Brook, what's your answer?
I mean, this is the problem, right? I mean, I'll answer it in a second, but I just want to give the context. The problem is that if you take one little program out of a mass of things where it's the least of our problems, I think the PPP of all the stuff the government's doing is the least offensive, right? Then it's really, really difficult to defend your position of that. Whereas if you took the $2.3 trillion stimulus package, it would be a lot easier. But, and they do it on purpose because they know it's the hardest to defend. But you could say something like, where do you think this money comes from? Who do you think is ultimately going to pay for it? It's going to be those same workers. Those workers might be now getting a paycheck, but how is that debt going to be paid back? It's going to be paid back on their backs. You cannot tax rich Americans enough money to pay that loan back. The middle class, the working class is going to have to see their taxes raised ultimately to pay back the ridiculous amounts of debt that this government, and how is that moral? That we are now smoothing out a crisis that we caused, this frigging government caused, right? Don't say that. This frigging government caused. We're smoothing out what Trump and the CDC and the FDA caused by printing money that these workers are going to have to pay back on their backs through their taxes. And by the way, the whole stimulus package and all of the Federal Reserve's interventions are going to lower the standard of living of every single American, particularly on the lower classes and the middle class, for a generation at least. There is no such thing, guys, as a free lunch. Somebody's going to have to pay for this, and we're going to pay for it through lower economic growth, higher taxes, and a greater burden on our children and our grandchildren. How's that?
Yep. At the very least, a lot of people who are out of work now, they'll get jobs, but they'll be lower paying jobs.
My purpose was not convince you. My purpose was convince the Fox audience.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how you have to frame it. You have to frame it as there's no free lunch. Somebody has to pay for it. Maybe they won't pay for it today, but ultimately it comes out of the productive ability of this country, which means zero economic growth forever.
I'll just say, and thank you for the entertaining. The Tea Party movement started because a trader said, I don't want to have to pay for someone else's bad decisions. So there was a moral thing at the start of it.
Absolutely.
And
I thought a lot of the Tea Party movement had a moral fervor to it,
right? And
but
then,
it never became intellectual. It
And
never.
Michelle Bachmann put that religious hot dog in her mouth, and it was over from there.
Well, and morality, remember, is associated with, for almost everybody, with religion. So it wasn't a far-fetched to go from a moral agenda to a religious agenda. And, this is the problem when people talk about morality, even when they talk about morality in a sense, the way we mean it, that an example where we also think it's morally offensive. But then they fall back in altruism when it comes to the next issue. They can't stay consistent. We're the only ones who can be moral when it comes to redistribution of wealth, moral when it comes to even during crises. We can have the right position about Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security. You remember the Tea Party signs, keep your hands off of my Medicare, at the same time as they're saying Obamacare is bad, right? Wait a minute, what's the difference between Obamacare and Medicare? Why is one good and one bad? There's no consistency there. We're the only ones who are consistent, and that's what makes us different. And that's the position that has to be presented, particularly if people are seeing you repeatedly. What they learn about you is that you're consistent.
How do even they justify the $600 extra that when somebody's offered a job back now, says, nah, I think I'll stay home because I make more money sitting at home. Forget our point of view. How do they justify it?
They justify it explicitly. They'll say, well, that is a sign that American workers are not making enough money, and it's time to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour so people can get back to work. And you'll see that in 6 months to a year, when you've got this problem of stickiness, people are staying unemployed, the left will say, well, the way to get them employed is to raise the minimum wage.
On a side note,
controls
that too, a government program wouldn't be a government program if it weren't filled with contradictions. In this case, you have on one hand, a piece of the stimulus that is give people forgivable loans, grants essentially, but only if they keep people employed. And on the other hand, they're convincing employees to say, please fire me.
No, it's actually a challenge for some. I've read some articles about restaurants and bars where it's actually more lucrative for the employee to go on unemployment insurance than it is to get the PPP. So restaurant owners are saying, I don't actually want to apply for the PPP, because I don't have any employees to pay them to. They don't have anything to do. They're
mad at me for wanting to hire them
because they could go and get unemployment insurance. It's better for them. I fire them now and hire them back when the restaurant opens. So it creates these bizarre circumstances. And I mean, all these programs, and some of them are less destructive and more destructive. I actually think the PPP is less destructive than many other government things because it actually, if you think about it this way, I mean,
they're talking about investing in oil companies and airlines, Yaron.
Who is?
Mnuchin.
Yeah.
Equity stakes in oil companies.
Did he get equity stakes? He wants equity.
He's talking about it.
Yeah, he's talking about it. I know, that's evil. So the nice thing about PPP is that it's a cash grant to small businesses, right? And yes, they have to keep their employees, but it doesn't try to run their business for them, right? It's not, and so much of this other stuff. I said from the beginning, if they're going to do a stimulus package, they should just write checks and give it to everybody. Helicopter money in my view, is better than trying to manipulate, and you should behave this way or that way, bailouts and all this crap. Just give everybody a check, right? And don't try to pick winners and losers. And they're not trying to pick winners or losers. They're doing, the PPP is basically the banks issuing it based on the bank's credit scores. So it's the least offensive of everything that's going on, particularly if you see what the Fed is doing. All right, let's take a couple of questions from the phone callers. 949. Area code 949. Orange County, I take it. Hello.
You probably have to unmute them.
Do I have to unmute them? Okay, I can do that.
I don't think they can unmute.
Hey, can you hear?
I can, Your Honor.
There you
Daniel.
go. Hey, Daniel.
You were talking about inflation-adjusted bonds earlier. Just a side note, did you see that this week 5-year TIPS went issue negative 37 basis points? First time I'd ever seen them go out negative.
Negative. So
Anyway.
what does that imply? So that's implying deflation. That's implying negative interest rates in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And tips, interestingly, do protect you or try to protect you both from inflation or deflation by the way they pay out. Which
That's right.
won't get into.
That's right.
But anyway, my question really is that with the energy we need to get the country back on its feet, is there ever a time when any president ever should be out there stumping for oil prices to be raised?
No, I mean, it's insanity. It's absolutely insane. I mean, cheap energy is exactly what the world economy needs right now to get back going with it's cheap, which means you can do more with it. So it's completely insane.
Well, one day he says he wants low oil prices because it helps the economy, and the next day he wants higher oil prices because it helps our great oil industry.
Well, and of course, he then goes and negotiates with the Russians and the Saudis. And this is the president who everybody's raving about his negotiating power. And they twist him around his finger, and he gets a deal that does not. The oil prices collapse 5 days later, completely into negative territory. People were literally paying other people to take the oil off their hands. I mean, it wasn't oil, it was future contract, but the equivalent of, please don't deliver. I'll pay you not to deliver the oil to me, which is insane, right? It just shows you kind of the what happens when governments control this. Now, the only aspect of that where the president might be engaged in is the foreign policy aspect. That is, it is true that the oil coming in is all from Saudi Arabia and Russia, not exactly friendly countries to the United States. And there is an issue about whether or not we should, squeeze their arm a little bit about what they're doing to oil, but I don't know how you do that in a serious way unless you're really willing to take back the oil from Saudi Arabia. And I agree with you that in an economy like we have today, what we need is cheap oil, not expensive oil. So
isn't the ultimate destroyer of cartels like OPEC the cartels themselves? Just let them eat each other alive and give us.
Well, that's what happened in this case, right? It's because the cartel couldn't set a price that the Russians and the Saudis got into a production war and drove the price down. So it's exactly that phenomena.
It's inevitable
that drove prices down. Usually a cartel establishes high prices. Here they establish low prices because they were fighting. That's what happens when people within a cartel fight. Was that, Daniel, did I get the gist of it?
You sure did. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, we got somebody from 917 area code. Let me just unmute you and let me mute Daniel. All right. Hey.
Hi, Yaron. This is Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. How's it going?
Doing well. I have some psychological observations I wanted to run by you. So since you brought up the attitude towards businessmen and your frustration about objectivists kind of not being able to respect businessmen who don't have the same political beliefs. Something that occurs to me is you and I have talked before about being repression in emotions and the importance of being de-repressed. And it occurs to me that, there might be an issue going on with a lack of independence and self-esteem. So self-esteem is at its very base love for oneself. And I think the objectivist conception of that would be you earn that through efficacious action in reality. But it would seem to me that if somebody is repressed, they're potentially missing, both in positive and negative emotions. They're missing the ability to feel that love for themselves. And psychologically, self-esteem is the most important value, I would say. Yeah. So there may be this seeking, kind of constant seeking for somebody else to complete that feeling. And something I've observed in some people's attitude towards Ayn Rand, and I've seen this routine go on where they adopt Ayn Rand as, somebody that they respect. They subscribe to objectivism. And then after a certain period of time, I think that they kind of adopt her in a way that's almost more of an idol rather than this is somebody I respect immensely. And I think that introduces, again, somebody who has a dependent self-esteem, a kind of inferiority complex.
Secondhand.
They then see something or observe something she said or did that they don't agree with. Now, they can agree with 99.9% of what she said or did, but that 0.1% just, they get obsessed with it.
Yep.
And it almost takes over their attitude towards objectivism and towards her. And eventually they turn against her. They want almost nothing to do with her. They want almost nothing to do with objectivism. And it occurs to me as the same process of what we might be observing as somebody who can see a business leader who they respect, but who has this thing that they disagree with. And so they don't only feel like towards him. Maybe they don't love him because he's not perfect to them, but they hate him. They actually hate him. It's this dichotomy between love and hate that may be introduced from this dependence in self-esteem. So I wanted to get your comment on if you think that that's valid and if you've observed some of the same things.
Well, I definitely observe the same things, and you see it all the time. And I mean, I think it's connected. It's all connected to repression in the sense that I think a lot of objectivists, I mean, think about how difficult in a sense objectivism is. I mean, in this sense, right? We read Ayn Rand when we're 18. We have no experience of the world, right? Very little as thinkers, as adults. We handed on a silver platter the truth, right? I mean, the answers. And it's mind-boggling. How do you deal with that, right? Because we don't have enough knowledge of reality to integrate that truth and make it ours in a first-handed kind of way. So most objectivists go through a long phase of rationalism, where they understand the philosophy abstractly. They understand all the connections between the things, maybe, right? Certain aspects of it they own because they are living it and they relate to it. But vast parts of it, they have no idea what's going on there because they can't relate it to concretes in reality because they haven't experienced those concretes in reality. And if, as you've observed in the past when we've talked, they're also psychologically repressed, then they can't connect to certain parts of it because they can't go there and they don't allow themselves to go there and they don't experience the emotions. So the philosophy stays for them as a floating abstraction, or at least chunks of the philosophy do. And then usually their point of disagreement comes in one of those chunks that is a floating abstraction now. And they can't integrate it, and they can't make any sense of it, and they obsess about it, and then they blow up. And, you know, what I've seen, particularly with Trump, and it's the same people who obsess about Trump. I mean, I'm not talking about people who voted for Trump and think he's okay. I'm talking about people who everything he does is magnificent, right? Is excellent. You know, and every criticism is left-wing propaganda, fake news, stuff like that. I mean, I have them on my Facebook page every single day. I mean, there are thousands of them. It's unbelievable. And many of them called themselves objectivists once and maybe still do, which is spooky. But again, it's at some point, what they really integrated is politics. They kind of got politics. They got engaged in the politics. Maybe they came from a conservative background and they always kind of had a lean towards the objectivist politics, but they got politics. They never fully integrated reason, purpose, self-esteem. They never fully integrated life. They never fully integrated values, hierarchy of values, the importance of living. I see this in people, and I'm not talking about people who professionally do this, but people who as a hobby obsess about the threat of Islam, or obsess about the threat, the latest conspiracy theories about the left, or obsess about something, and it's always political, and it trumps their entire life, and their happiness doesn't matter anymore because the Muslims are coming, and we need to build our bunker, right, or whatever. And so, you know, maybe they've got a job. Some of them, I'm not sure, but maybe they've got a job, and maybe they do okay with their job, but they're not. They don't have a career in the full sense of it. They don't have a love life in the full sense of it, or romantic life in the full sense of it. They don't live fully They obsess about these things, and their objectivism, when it comes to morality, epistemology, is a complete floating abstraction. All they ever integrated was politics. And the same thing here with the businessman. Instead of seeing their productive genius, instead of seeing the beauty and the benefit you get from it, as an egoist, the benefit I get from my iPhone or from Amazon. Oh, Jeff Bezos. I forgot Jeff Bezos. I'm a huge Jeff Bezos fan. Look at what Amazon has done to their own life, or look at what Zoom, we're using Zoom right now, what it has done to their lives, and admire and say thank you, want to say thank you to the people. They go look and check their voting record, as if that's relevant to the experience of, wow, I can use Zoom to do all these amazing things. I mean, my mind never goes to politics. Unless it's in politics. I mean, and from that, it never goes to politics. I never think about, I wonder what the politics of the entrepreneur is. It just is, I mean, that's down the road maybe, right? Right now, I'm enjoying this. This is a benefit to me. And I'm an egoist. So if I'm enjoying it, I want to relish in the enjoyment of the thing, not in some thing irrelevant. So it's, I just saw a comment Jonathan wrote on YouTube. I wish Yaron had better critics. Yeah, me too. You think of a few. Who I wish I didn't, who I wish were better. So it really is this lack of integration. And I think you're absolutely right about self-esteem. So all of this comes down to, if you're an objectivist and the philosophy is a floating abstraction and you obsess about certain things, you never actually gain the benefits of the philosophy. And the benefit of the philosophy is self-esteem and happiness. That's the payoff. That's what it's about. Because you never actually work to integrate it. You never actually have it integrated, available to you on a moment-to-moment basis. You're not living it in a moment-to-moment basis. It's something that occurs to you when you do politics. But in life, most of the time, you're afraid. And this is what motivates a lot of this interest in politics. It's fear. It's motivated by fear. I've noticed this. And people who obsess about politics, they're afraid. They're constantly afraid that the world's going to come to an end, that the left is going to come, the Muslims are coming, somebody's going to, the environmentalists are going to kill somebody. Now, there's reason to be worried. But this obsession and fear, you got to live. And they forget to live. So they never get that opportunity to integrate the self-esteem. Now, it's a spiral. Everything in life is kind of the spiral. Leonard Peikoff talks about the spiral of knowledge, right? And it reinforces. So you don't have self-esteem. So that affects your emotional life. The fact that you have a weak emotional life makes you obsess about certain things and be more afraid, which reduces your ability to have self-esteem, and it just reinforces each other constantly. And a lot of it is connected to the fact that they can't go to morality in a personal way because they're oppressed. Because to deal with morality on a personal level, which is the only way really to deal with morality, means to be exposed, to expose yourself. What are my true motivations? Because look, we all have altruism embedded in there. And we all have to root it out. And it's not easy to root it out. We all have all kinds of crap that our parents taught us, that we came to conclusions when we were kids about, that Avi and I, that our nation taught us when we were growing up in Israel. We have crap inside there, and you have to root it out. And that requires the opposite of repression. That requires actually being connected to your emotions and knowing why you feel what you feel, and then finding the source of it and rooting it out. And if you're repressed, you can't do that, and therefore you're stuck. And I think that's where people, again, that was a long answer, but that's where people are. So I think these psychological issues are really, really, really crucial. That makes sense?
Yeah, the Trump, absolutely. And the Trump, absolutely. And the Trump point, I mean, that is such an expression of this, in that, like, they're looking for Trump to they love Trump.
Yes.
I mean, I would literally put it that way. They love Trump, and it's like if you say something negative, you're attacking someone they love. This is totally a lack of self-esteem.
They are looking for a Superman to solve their problems. And in this case, they're political problems, and Trump is their Superman. And he is the guy who's going to solve all the problems for them. And because you know what the great virtue Trump has for them is that he seems to stand up to the bad guys, whoever the bad guys are, right? You stay, and when you show them that he doesn't really they whitewash it because they need a hero. They can't live without a hero. They need to believe somebody is fighting their fight for them because their life depends on it, because their self-esteem depends on it. Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, you want to say something?
Well, just quickly, Yaron, I mean, you're getting back to your point about, well, for me at least, objectivism is not about winning a political argument, but simply having a happier life, living a better and fuller life, not ever, of course, with unhappy moments or challenges, but living just feeling more alive and not, winning a political skirmish on Facebook or anywhere else.
Yeah, and feeling alive, which means, and using objectivism to solve problems and deal with reality and deal with people and deal with yourself and deal with stuff. And all of that reinforces, attain your values, and through attaining your values, achieve happiness. That's what it really is all about. Yeah. All right, we'll do one more round. Wow, already an hour has gone by like that. Jim.
Well, I do have a question lined up, but I mean, that whole question, your thoughts on it really have me thinking about, excuse me, my path to Ayn Rand. And that might be an interesting show to have a bunch of people talk about how they found their way to Ayn Rand. And in my particular case, I look back and I understand now that I've always had this rejection of people wanting to control me. And somewhere along the line in high school, I found Milton Friedman's Free to Choose. A lot of people did. And it was funny enough, in high school, a leftist friend of mine who said, you should learn about Ayn Rand. She wrote stuff like you're talking about. And to my thinking, what Milton Friedman had to say was floating abstractions because I was too young to really understand all of it. But it sounds so reasonable. And if anything, it was Ayn Rand who grounded his ideas to a reality I could understand, a very base level. So just a little side thought. Yep. My question, an ethics question. A question about whose freedom, I suppose. A hypothetical. You're out for a walk one day on a city street, and there's this one guy who's just pestering you. He's trying to sell you something, and you're like, I'm not interested. Go away. And he just won't go away. And you got a good 30-minute walk, and he's there the whole way. Now, it looks like we have a balance of freedoms here. Freedom of speech or intruding on my space.
Well, I don't think that's freedom of speech. I mean, if he's standing and speaking and you're walking by, he's literally following you. He's intruding on your space. He's getting in your face. You've asked him to go away. That's harassment. I mean, there's plenty of law, I think, about harassment. I don't think it would be anything new. So I don't think there's an issue of speech there. It's not the fact that he's speaking that is what you're trying to stop. It's the fact that he's following you and getting.
You've already said no.
Yeah, and you've said no. So I think there's. I don't know the law well enough, but I'm pretty sure there's law that relates to this issue of harassment and an issue of being in your space. People can't just come up to you and just engage you, even if they don't touch you, particularly if you say move back.
Right. Which interestingly addresses the second variant of this. What if it's 50 people all in a line, and as you're walking, each one gets their 10 seconds to pester you?
I would choose a different street. No, I mean, that's right. I mean, they have a right to stand there and say their speech. Now, again, you'd solve that problem if the street was private.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one out because I think in a lot of ways, I'm going to mention Minority Report here. For those who've seen that Tom Cruise movie from the late 90s, it illustrated what I think the left imagines a truly free market would become, where he's bombarded by all of these billboards, right? These holograms in his face, and they're all reading his retina so they know who he is. So they're trying to tailor, and that's what they imagine they need restrictions on private speech for.
Well, and you'd have to think about under what conditions is that appropriate, right? They're reading your retina, your identity. It's not clear that that's legit. And can you wear glasses that shield, right, your eyes from them reading them, or can you create a technology that stops it? So there's a lot of complexity in science fiction. Jonathan, you had your hand up before? You were raising a hand like a good student in a class. All right, I missed the cue. I misread it. Sorry, John.
Can you draw any conclusions about a person's character from the art they enjoy?
No, I don't think so. What you can draw is about their sense of life. And a sense of life is not character. The sense of life, they often don't have a control over. The sense of life is not something that they consciously create. It's something usually created when we're young. You can influence it as you grow older, but it's not something you can consciously just change, right? You have to work on it. So you can say something about their sense of life. Now, if somebody loves what I would call non-art, that says something about their character. It says that they're second-handed because there's no there. So the fact that they're getting ecstatic about nothing means that there's something weird about them and there's something second-handed and fake. I think almost everybody who likes modern art, white on white or noise, as
banana taped to the wall, duct tape to the wall.
Duct tape to the wall. My favorite is white on white, right? So it's painting white on white, and it's just white, and there's a little description, there's a little plaque that explains it, the philosophical meaning of white and white. I mean, those things are duct tape, urinals. I mean, all this stuff. I mean, just pieces of metal crunched together. It's at best decorative. So you can look at something like that, something that has a lot of color on it. You can say that's pretty, but does it move me like art should move you? If it does, something's wrong with you. So, and usually they're just faking it. So that I think is true. But no, I think sense of life is not completely in our control.
Do you mind defining, though, the difference between sense of life and character? This is interesting.
I don't, that on the spot, I'm not going to define them. I'll characterize them. So character is, you measure character by your behavior, by your choices, by your conscious actions, right? By how you act in situations, right? A person with good character doesn't lie. They don't they don't run away from, slightest risk. They're not cowards. They're, basically character is morality. They've got a moral character. They have integrity. That would be a characteristic of character, right? So it's the application of to what extent have they internalized morality in their life, right? That's character. Sense of life is a kind of subconscious response to the world. It's a subconscious integration of your metaphysical value judgments. And those metaphysical value judgments you probably make when you're very, very young. Now you can change them, but it's hard and you can't, and your response to art won't necessarily automatically change. It takes a while. So you can't just evaluate a person based on their metaphysics. You can say that response to art represents a certain type of sense of life. But Ayn Rand was very clear on this. It's hard enough to identify your own sense of life. To identify somebody else's sense of life, forget it. Now, maybe if you're married to them for 30 years, right, and you're intimately connected to them, then you can. But 90% of the time, 99% of the time, you cannot make those. So you like a piece, somebody else likes a piece of art, you don't like the same art. It says something about them, but you can't make a generalization about them, about who they are, what they are, about their metaphysical value judgments without knowing them much, 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 much better. You just know that there's a difference between you. So sense of life, art generally is something to use to know yourself better. I mean, the primary thing about art is just experience it, just that you have the pleasure and joy of experiencing it. And then psychologically, it's important to learn about yourself. It's not, shouldn't be used to evaluate other people. Emmett.
Hey, well, I've been thinking about, how a lot of people who still have jobs are less empathetic about the people who've lost their jobs. But I'm realizing that a lot of the jobs that have been lost are those kind of in a division of labor society are those jobs that are kind of the support roles and things, restaurants and those kinds of things. And I'm wondering how long is it going to be before those of us who still have jobs, the businesses that are employing us, don't have enough business coming from the other sectors of the economy to keep going at the same rates, and those kinds of jobs have to start laying off people.
Well, I think that's absolutely the case. And as economic activity dries up, as money flows dry up, it's going to affect everybody. I mean, and it's not just waiters and people like that. People in finance are losing their jobs right now. I mean, if you work for a hedge fund that's lost a lot of money, and you're on the marketing side, you're probably out. Or you're in some other position. You're probably, a lot of hedge, or you're the investment manager who lost a lot of money. A lot of the big investment houses have laid people off. If you're in a consulting business, well, who are you consulting with?
Small business owners too, right?
Yeah. So across the board, there are layoffs. But you're right. The sense is that a lot of us work from home anyway. I mean, I work from home anyway. So it's easy to say, well, those people who lost their jobs and it doesn't really affect me. I mean, it affects me because their businesses are gone and I'm a consumer of their businesses and I don't get to go to the restaurants, right? So that hurts my life. So it's all connected, and you can't have one part of the economy go bust and nothing else happen. It's all interconnected. There really is a huge interconnectedness of the economy. I'll give you an example. I invest in banks. Banks make loans to restaurants. Restaurants close. The bank is hurting because maybe the restaurant will default on its loan. I'm hurting because I invest in the bank, right? That's a direct chain. You can't separate the waiter from the hedge fund guy. We're connected through the way he works with the loan to the bank, and the same with any one of these businesses, even businesses that don't trade are related to businesses who do trade. Maybe they're suppliers, maybe they're subcontractors, a division of labor society is a heavily interconnected society. This is what people are complaining about trade right now. Oh, we're too dependent on the Chinese. Well, yeah, and I'm too dependent on you, and you're in a sense, right? But the only alternative to that is subsistence farming, right? That's the nature of capitalism, the nature of freedom, the nature of success is to be interdependent in these ways. And if you fail, that hurts me, even in microscopic ways that I can't really tell right now, but it does. We are connected economically. So yeah,
I haven't seen anything like that in the news. Have you seen anybody making that point?
No, I just made it now because I
Exactly.
hadn't thought of it before, and that's the beauty of these questions. But no, people don't think of that. They take one of the things. Everything Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations is basically take it completely for granted. Right? Trade is just there. Division of labor is just there. It's not an achievement. Division of labor is not an achievement. It's just there. The fact that my iPhone arrives through the mail from Amazon on time, it's just there. Nobody thinks about what went into building it, making it, putting it together, the raw materials, the engineering talent, the design, all the little things, the millions of aspects of it that went together. And then that it could make it from China, and I can only afford it because it's actually assembled in China. And then it goes to a warehouse somewhere in Amazon, and they are so good at the logistics of it that it arrives at my place exactly the time they promised it. We just take all that for granted, and it is truly stunning. And then economists like Hayek kind of explain how it all works through the price system, but it's much more than the price system. It makes our lives, it makes this division of labor society such a beautiful thing. But yes, when one part of it fails, we all suffer. And that's why there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that say China did this on purpose so that the West would suffer. But that's nuts, because if the West suffers, China suffers. China's have as much, if not more, right? And so again, it's this interdependency in a sense, in a healthy trading sense, that exists, which makes it so that if you tariffs are lose-lose, trade is win-win. Everything is together. You can't separate us, right?
I really think that a lot of these people who are hardcore wanting the lockdowns to continue just assume that everyone's going to get their job back as soon as this is over, and that everything's going to be exactly as it was before.
I think that's part of it. I think they don't think is another part of it. I think they, yes, and they don't have really any conception of the economy, what that means to life. Yeah.
It reminds me somewhat, hearing you describe it, it brings to mind Ayn Rand's illustration of this process in the collapse of the economy towards the end of Atlas Shrugged, where the one business had suppliers who went out of business and then they couldn't get supplies. And
yes, exactly. I mean, she
illustrated it beautifully.
It's lose, 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 and it just keeps going.
And cascading.
So the only time to celebrate somebody's bankruptcy is when they deserve it. That is when they can't compete, or when their product is obsolete or something like that. But a bankruptcy that is caused by either an external stimulus like a virus or a terrorist attack, or more likely government action, is a massive tragedy, even if it doesn't affect you directly. And it affects you indirectly. That's the point. It affects you indirectly. All right, Jennifer.
A couple months ago, I saw on the news, a lot of kids were on the beach in Florida, like before they closed it down or right around that time.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that was a good idea, or that young people should act recklessly, jump off buildings or whatever. Sometimes young people act crazy. But I remember the reporter said something like, well, young people, they feel invincible, and I kind of thought, well, are you sort of supposed to feel like that? Like when you're 20, you're supposed to feel immortal. You know what I mean? I mean, not that you should be acting crazy, but I thought it was kind of sad to think that they're supposed to, in a sense, feel that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I miss about being young is that I truly felt invincible.
And you knew everything.
I did insane things. I did things that I would never do today.
You hitchhiked across America.
I hitchhiked across America when I was 18. You're muted. So
and things that you wouldn't want your kids to do.
I'd kill them if they did. Right. I drove a Jeep to Beirut with an AK-47 in the back, and my senior officer next to me, didn't give it a thought, and drove back from Beirut to Tel Aviv in one evening at night, a lone Jeep in enemy territory. And I thought I was being courageous and brave and smart. And what was I thinking? I was nuts. It was completely insane. And yeah, I did really dumb stuff when I was a kid, when I was young, right? I guess in a sense, I don't regret it because it was an experience. But yeah, I mean, I think part of youth is that it's physically, I could jump, I could do anything physically. I was healthy. I was in great shape. And today I jump, I worry if I'll ever get up, right? I worry, is the knee gonna go? Is this gonna, I mean, I'm still in good shape, but I don't trust my body anymore. I was watching today, I was at the beach, and I was watching kite surfers. I don't know if you've seen kite surfers. Oh my God, that looks like so much fun. And everything in me said, I want to do that. And then I had to remind myself that I'll be 59 in like a few weeks, and my body probably can't take it. Although I'm going to try. When this is all over, I'm going to try, because it looked unbelievable. They literally float in the air. The kite lifts the thing up above the water. So their surfboard is literally in the air, and they have like an anchor that keeps them in the water, but it's just looks. So yes, there's a certain, yeah. And you want to, one of the things you want as a parent, and one of the things you want in a sense as a society, is you want to create a safe space. Not a safe space in the sense that they cut the bears and stuff. In a country, a place where kids can go a little crazy, do some stupid things and be safe. And that's the evil of something like pandemic and not dealing with it, is suddenly they can't hang out. They can't go to the beach. You know, they can't do the things that kids do. And you don't want them to do in that circumstances because it is harmful. And it's not so harmful to them. It's irresponsible because it's harmful to other people, particularly their parents and their grandparents, right? That's who is going to get hurt from it. It's unlikely that they are going to get hurt from it. So, but yes, there's definitely a whole aspect of youth that is about feeling invincible, which is actually a beautiful thing, a good thing, not a bad thing. It's why, you know, we talk a lot about rock music, right? And it's why I think there's something about rock music and the lyrics and the music that they can only write in their 20s, and they can't write it later. Very few of them are any good later in life in a sense of writing and the music. They peak at the ripe old age of 25. Because there's something about that spirit of youth, that invincibility, that rebellion, that idealism that exists and that is washed away as we get older.
The rise through angst into success.
Jonathan.
Is the fantasy always better than the reality?
I won't say what I was going to say. I don't think so. I was going to say only in threesomes, but then I'd have
Well,
to.
depending what kind of fantasies you have, Jonathan.
I was going to leave that up to your own. I was thinking of it in the investment perspective. You know, oftentimes what happens in the investment world is that
I don't think in terms of fantasy and investment.
Well, before a company releases good earnings, you know, it's highly valued. And then when it actually starts making money, that fantasy goes away. But you can answer it however you'd like, Yaron. Yaron thought of threesomes. I thought of PE ratios.
Say fantasy. That's where my mind goes. Sorry. I don't think of fantasy in terms of investing. So it's something else in terms of investing. Is the reality, is the expectation bigger than the realization? And I think there's a sense in which investing, what happens is, so when the earnings are announced.
But you know what? I'd rather actually have you answer it about threesomes if you don't mind.
No, I'm going to skip the threesomes.
You were the one who brought it up.
I try to control myself, you notice. So, but I'm very bad about that. So I'm going to skip that. I'm going to do the investing. So when you want to get me in trouble, Jonathan, really, when the earnings come out, which are focused in is on, let's say the what this means for the company and the positive stuff that this means for the company, right? Once it starts realizing, once the quarter goes on, now you're focused on the next future. Now you're focused on what's going to happen next. Investing is about the future. It's not about the present. You know, the price today should reflect expectations about the future. You know, net present value of future cash flows. That's what prices should reflect. So you're always looking forward. So once the current story is beginning to be told, you're already focused on the next story, because that's how investment works. And I think to some extent that's how life works. So there is this sense in which we strive to get a certain value, and then we get it. There's a sense, people say there's a sense in which you're not satisfied because you set a new goal. You set a new, you create a new value. But that's a wrong way to think of it. It's true because we constantly are value seekers, and that's healthy. But it doesn't mean that you didn't get the full benefit of the value that you just achieved. Like you climb one mountain, now you need to climb a higher mountain. It's not that the fantasy wasn't as good as the reality wasn't as good as the fantasy. It's that once the fantasy realized you need a new fantasy, you've done it. All right, now what? What's next? Right? We're not easy. Do you want to ask a quick question, Yaron, or do you have to jump? Because you're next.
My question is probably kind of long answer, so I'll reserve my time for next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us. So there is this, and I know a lot of in psychology and a lot of kind of self-help gurus talk about this idea that, once you achieve your values, you just seek another value. So, settle, get in the, meditate and accept what you have. Don't be too ambitious. But that's complete BS. Yes, I'm always, once I achieve something, I want to achieve more. But that doesn't diminish the value of what I've achieved. Does that somewhat answer your question, Jonathan?
Yes. Yes, it does. Thank you, Yaron.
We can talk about the threesomes over a glass of wine. All right, we've got Daniel. Let me unmute Daniel.
So, Yaron, what are you reading for fiction right now? If you care, I'm reading a C.W. Lemoyne series, a Spectre series. It's a military thriller. Not great art, but it's fine.
Yeah, good. I am reading. I have to. Let me just pull out my my Kindle here because I'm reading this long series. It's like 8 books. I think I'm on book 3, and I actually haven't read it in a while because I was reading a lot when I was flying. And I actually I'm listening to this on tape, so it's actually an Audible. Let me find my Audible. It's a series of books on a period of history that I do not know enough about, but it's called the Baroque cycle. So it's about the Baroque, but it really is 1650 to 1730, let's say. It's you're going to say something there, Daniel?
No, okay.
So I just could hear something, and it's a period of history, which is the beginning of the Enlightenment. This is the Enlightenment. This is it, right? And the novels deal with, so they're framed by a conflict. And what's the conflict? The conflict is between Leibniz and Newton over who invented calculus, right? And it takes 8 books, right? Because it bounces between, it frames the story. And then there's this one guy he's in the Massachusetts colony, and he's going to go back to London to help Leibniz and Newton resolve the conflict. In the meantime, the whole series is flashbacks to the period in between, right? So I'm learning a huge amount about the history of London during that period, about the Royal Society, about Newton. Locke is still kind of a figure at the margin. I'm not sure we're going to get into Locke, but a lot of the scientists, Hooke, and a lot of these other scientists and what they were doing about alchemy, which Newton dabbled in and everything. And then there's a parallel story going on in continental Europe, centered partially around Leibniz, partially about these other characters, including one character who's described as the king of the gypsies, who's like a gypsy character but anyway, it's fascinating, just all kinds of people. And again, I don't think it's great art, but it's a period in history I don't know, and yet I'm fascinated by, because what could be more fascinating than the birth of the Enlightenment? And it's the era of the scientific revolution. It's an era of the beginnings of a real understanding of individualism and a political revolution. And it's an era where a lot of people in England are saying, to hell with what's going on here. They're going to Massachusetts, or they're going to America. So it really is the birth of the modern world. Those are the years where the modern world in many respects is born. So I find it really fascinating. It's by a guy named Neal Stephenson, Nealstephenson. And
the Baroque cycle. Okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
And I'm on book 3 of the Baroque cycle. And I found it quite enjoyable so far. So we will see. Hopefully I'll get a chance to finish it all.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Andrew. Unmute you. Yep.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about the connection between the Christian attitude towards pride and the disrespect for businessmen. Mm-hmm. Ayn Rand on one of the Donahue interviews, there was a woman, she announced herself as, she was a questioner, and she announced herself as Christian, and she asked her, Ayn Rand, what's wrong with gratitude? And it took Ayn Rand a couple of seconds to even make sense of the question. I couldn't make sense of the question at all. But Ayn Rand basically said, if you do something good, you should give yourself credit. You shouldn't be giving credit to God. That's very psychologically dangerous to give somebody else credit for your achievements. And it interests me that, from Obama saying one of the most vilest statements ever made by a politician, I think, which is you didn't build that, to something that really bothers me, which is the constant complaining about the tech industry, and Amazon and Google and Facebook. I lashed out a little bit on Twitter the other day because somebody was talking about how those companies are like mini governments and they have way too much power. And I said, do you use their products? If you do use their products, you can stop using their products and reduce their power. But otherwise, if you are using their products, show some gratitude and stop complaining. There's just this disrespect, I think. I mean, I've never seen people on the very property like Facebook complain incessantly about the people who make that property possible and who created it.
I know.
So to me, it's like, is there something going on here where they don't want the Bezos and the Zuckerbergs and the people who did build that to know how good they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're afraid of that because what it'll say about themselves. I think they are. I think you connected it originally to the issue of pride, and I do think Christians view pride as a vice. The recognition of one's own worth, the recognition of one's own success. And when you see, one of the things I like about Bezos and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs definitely had this, is they all had a sense of pride. They all had this sense that we changed the world. We're pretty cool. We're pretty smart. When you see interviews with Bill Gates, he is not meek about how successful Microsoft was. And even though, he'll say it was all luck or whatever, he doesn't think that, not emotionally in a sense, not in the way it's reflected in his body language. He worked damn hard to make it happen. He used his mind. He was better than the competition. So I think that what people resent is not just their success. It's that they seem to be proud of their success. They seem to enjoy their success. They seem to be happy and successful. And they then need an excuse for their own misery and their own low self-esteem and their own lack of confidence. And they lash out at these people who represent, from a Christian moral perspective, the bad guys. And it definitely is a reflection of a lack of self-esteem, a reflection of envy, but it's a reflection of the fact that they're not happy. They're not good with their life, and they need to find an excuse. I mean, again, I hate to bring back Trump and politics, but this is what Trump really realized, that people with low self-esteem need an excuse for the bad things happening to them. Need somebody to blame for the bad things happening to them. So it's easy to blame the Chinese and to blame the immigrants and to blame the elites. That's easy. And then I am now free of all fault. It wasn't my fault. And I'm not miserable because I made bad decisions in life. I'm miserable because Jeff Bezos is exploiting me. Because that guy at Facebook is making a huge amount of money off of me, or whatever.
Yeah. You're on. If I could jump in.
Sure.
I know you say they have pride, the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses and the Gates. I wish they had more.
I wish
they would recognize that they are disrespected by politicians, by people in society who should be. They deserve respect, and on some level, I think they're so independent that they feel like I don't need the appreciation of others. I'm just self-driven. But they're missing something. They're missing something that, I think if you look at Atlas Shrugged, they can get what they're missing if they were looking in the right place. but
Yeah,
they should be respected.
most of them are read
More.
and shrugged, and they can't integrate it. They can't completely internalize it, which is the greatest tragedy in the world, because they deserve Atlas Shrugged, right? These are the guys that deserve Atlas Shrugged, and they don't quite completely get it. So yes, I agree with you completely. They should be more proud, and that pride should be reflected. I mean, when you see a Zuckerberg in front of Congress, and I don't know if you saw those hearings, but these people, world-class clowns and idiots, and just unbelievable the questions they ask. And you know that what he's thinking in his mind is, why am I here? Who are the, but he can't say that. He doesn't have the philosophical confidence, the self-esteem to stand up to them. And he's afraid of them. He really is. But at the same time, he knows he's better than them. He knows these people are complete and utter idiots who don't have a clue about what he does, and yet are there to judge him.
They have real power and they can crush him.
So I agree completely. Great tragedy is that they don't have more self-esteem, and what they don't have too is the language, the philosophy to be able to properly defend themselves.
I watched some Peter Schiff testifying in front of Congress back in 2011, and I love how he was just telling them, "You guys are responsible for this." I couldn't believe the balls on that guy. Just
Peter has balls.
Yeah,
Peter's great. I mean, he's wrong on a lot of stuff, but he's great in those kind of circumstances. He doesn't hold back, and you know, as long as you don't, I mean, as long as you don't take investment advice from him, I think he's fantastic. I love Peter.
I want more people doing that to browbeat them.
Alex did it in front of Congress, Alex Epstein, and they won't invite me, but if I was there, I would love to be there.
It's just a shame, you know. I saw some meme going around last week, I think, with Bezos, and he was touring a facility, an Amazon facility. I mean, Amazon has been a hero in this whole coronavirus situation, in terms of keeping up deliveries and just keeping everybody, you know, stocked with whatever. But, you know, and they overlaid music from Star Wars. I'm not that familiar with Star Wars, but it's just like this very ominous, I think, Darth Vader music of him walking through the facility, and then showing Amazon blimps delivering packages, you know, dropping them from the air. And it was meant as a joke. And, you know, you don't want to be too serious online, because there's people who are just caught up in it, but it's like, it's not befitting of the man, or what, you know, this is a hero.
No, I agree completely.
So I just wish it was ingrained in the culture, you know, I mean, between us objectivists.
Objectivist, and then it drives you completely. They completely missed the whole point of Atlas Shrugged. You know, they would be making fun today of Dagny and Reardon for, you know, I didn't get it. She got the speech from Galton. She didn't get it. She's immoral. She's a lefty. She's supporting the system, you know, and instead of getting the context and admiring her for what she does. If they have read Atlas Shrugged and then they go out and condemn businessmen for having the wrong politics, they didn't get the book at all. They didn't get the book at all. Okay, I'm going to take a few super chat questions. We got 6 of them, so I'll try to do them quickly. Are there people with no soul? How does this happen? I mean, there's a sense in which most people don't have a soul. Soul is something you have to make. Soul is something you create. Soul is your values, the integrated whole of your values. There has to be an integration. There has to be a whole. So people who don't pursue values, who don't think in those terms, who don't focus on it, who don't integrate them, often just don't have a soul because they haven't spent the time working on it. So Ankagate has a great essay in the companion to Ayn Rand Studies, Greg Salameri's book, about Ayn Rand's statement about a self-made soul, about a man with a self-made soul. But that's the only kind of soul you can have. Otherwise, it's just a gibberish in there. It's not a soul. It's not a comprehensive whole. So a soul is your values integrated. That's basically what it is. And you can include your character integrated. And if people don't integrate, they don't have it. If you see someone you don't like drowning, is it immoral not to call for help? Well, I mean, it depends why you don't like him, right? If it's Hitler, then it would be immoral to call for help, right? So it depends how bad this person is, how evil this person is. If you just don't like him, but he's a normal, productive human being, then yeah, I think it's immoral not to call for help. I think you should, since it costs you nothing, you should try to help somebody who is drowning, particularly at a very low cost, even if you don't like him. But if the person is evil, then yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind. There's a few people I can think of that I wouldn't mind watching drown.
This kind of reminds me of a theme that's become really common in a lot of movies, where some annoying throwaway character is just being annoying and they die. And they want you to think that this is just desserts, even though if you really thought about it, like, why are you rooting for this ordinary person to die?
Well, a lot of movies manipulate you emotionally to root for guys that you wouldn't if you had a chance to really think about it. But and you have to be aware of that. I'm very sensitive to movies trying to manipulate my emotions. Some directors are very good at it. And there's sometimes you can earn an emotion. Good movies make you earn the emotion, right? They give you enough to make you feel something that's just, that's deserved. And then there are movies who use all the tricks in the book to get you to feel something that they haven't earned because they haven't built it up. They haven't created it properly. I'm trying to think of an example, but, and I think it's somewhat personal in terms of what you consider being manipulated or what me not. I did not like Schindler's List, partially because I felt like he was manipulating me. But that's just my context. I don't expect anybody else to have that context. From my context, seeing the horrors of the Holocaust over and over again throughout my childhood, that movie felt the same thing with another Holocaust movie was the Italian one where the Italian comedian, Life is Beautiful, a movie I really disliked partially because of that. Let's see. Warren Buffett has liberal politics, yet he has a huge influence in educating masses in capitalism, vice, value, investing methodology. How big of an influence do you think he has been spreading capitalism? I mean, I think Warren Buffett, for the most part, give capitalism a good name, and then he spouts his politics, and I don't think people pay attention much. But when he talks about investing, I think people really pay attention. When he talks about how capitalism works, I think people really pay attention. Now, again, he's a mixed case, but he's one of the good guys because he's productive. He's really achieved something. I mean, you don't make the kind of money he made without it. He understands, and he has this ability to buy assets when they're cheap, to see real value when other people don't see the value, and he's got the foresight to hold, to sit on a stock for a long time before he gains the values. So I think he's more of a plus than a negative in terms of educating people about capitalism. What's the difference between being content and being happy, flourishing? I mean, you get it in the word. Content means satisfied, just there, right? Happy means happy. This is life. I'm living it. I'm completely enthralled with it. I'm completely integrated with it. I mean, I'm really, he goes again. You see, can't last an hour and 44 minutes and he's out. He missed that. I'll have to remind you of that. I'm commenting on Jonathan. So it's just content means it's okay. Happy means it's great in a deeper sense, in a really, really deep sense. Can the West survive long enough for objectivist ideas to have political influence? The West appears to be collapsing at an alarming rate. I don't know. I mean, we will have influence one day somewhere. I don't know where, maybe Africa, maybe Asia, maybe the West. I don't know where. And the world seems to be collapsing at an alarming rate. I think this coronavirus is accelerating whatever collapse was already happening, both in the sense of authoritarian government and in a sense of just economics and people's reliance on governments and so on. And I'm worried, and I think everybody should be worried about where we're heading and what the outcome of all this could be. How do people become millionaires and billionaires today, given these oppressive tax rates? Well, just look around you. I mean, people are becoming millionaires and billionaires. They're doing it by starting businesses, being entrepreneurial, having ideas. It's hard. It's harder than it should be. It's harder certainly in some sectors of the economy than others. But millionaires and billionaires are being created or creating themselves every single day. And it's by being entrepreneurial.
Statistically, the upper class has been growing while the lower class has been shrinking in America.
The middle class is shrinking because more middle class are becoming rich. So there's no problem. I mean, there is a problem. It's hard to get out of poverty, and it's harder to become a millionaire or billionaire than it should be, but it's still possible. And all you have to do is look for examples. And if you don't know anybody, look up Silicon Valley. There are plenty of millionaires and billionaires who weren't millionaires or billionaires 10 years ago. And they did it in this environment with these taxes.
Even in China.
In China and Europe and all over the place. Even in more higher tax rate. I mean, if Lars Christian became very, very wealthy in Denmark, which has a marginal tax rate of 80%. But if you create enough value, you can make it. All right. Thank you, everybody. Now 45 minutes. We found 50. We keep extending these. Good to see you. Have a great rest of your weekend. I'll be on tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time with Amy. So we'll do a Yaron and Amy show. We haven't done one of those in a long time. So, which is good for me because I don't have to prep for those. She does all the preparation.
Thank you very much. This is a great show as always.
Good to see you all. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for the support. Thank you all in the super chat. Bye, everybody.